Rob.
Tony. And I'm Jeff.
We're in gaming.
And that's you.
Hello gamers and welcome back to the end. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. And today we're going to be going over some of the top 5 decks beginner Hearthstone players should look to build and kind of stray towards when they're just entering Hearthstone. You're like, what the hell kind of deck do I want? I don't know what's good. I don't know what I can actually build with the cards I have. What's cheap? What's effective? What's the most bang for my buck? So I actually made this video a while back and I put up decks that most beginners wouldn't have off of the bat. It was more of so a deck foundation that you'd want to strive to build to as a beginning player and not so much have right away. So this might have been like kind of bad and kind of good to some players. You know, they're like, oh, this has a legendary in it, I'm never gonna have that card. And it's kind of just like, okay, well, you can replace that with something very similar to it, but that didn't seem to, you know, connect two dots, you know, together at all. So I've kind of did some research and I found a Reddit post of a guy who built very budget-based decks with the current standard format using the cards that are basically given to you at the start. Classic cards, mostly basic cards though. There's some neutrals in there, but the neutrals are fairly cheap, and he has it broken down here. Let me close out of Hearthstone real quick and bring it up to you. So I actually did not build these decks, but I did look them over. I looked at his writing, I looked at the reasoning behind why he had particular cards in there, and I would have to agree with him. And I also tested out some of these decks on my own free-to-play account, and it worked out pretty well for the most part. So again, I found this on Reddit. A lot of good information there if you're a new Hearthstone player looking to get better. This is where I find a lot of the information I kind of go over in videos, along with just go there to kind of stroll and see what's up in the Hearthstone community as a whole. So before we get started, again, top 5 decks. This is, you know, my personal opinion of he posted like 9 decks. I picked out 5 that if I was a beginning player and someone showed me this is what kind of I would want, you know. But again, all personal opinion. He posted 4 other decks that you may like better, but I think this is a really good starting point for most new players. Sorry, it is 7:40 a.m. in the morning, so. Also, on top of not only a deck list and the amount of dust each deck takes, he writes basically a full guide going over the playstyle of the deck, why he has each minion. He goes over a video explaining the deck. He gives you a mulligan guide, so each deck that I'm going to show you has all of this to it. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. I recommend reading it. The link to each of these I will post in the description along with the entirety of the post if you're looking for even more than these 5 decks that I may not have pointed out. So off the bat, his first deck that I want to go over is the standard Cthulhu Druid. Again, all these decks are in budget, are for budget players not looking to, you know, really spend a whole lot on a deck, but are looking for a decent deck that's going to perform well and be fairly consistent. Again, these are not top tier decks. If these were top tier decks, I would have built the decks and I would have shown you, but then it's not for beginners, and that kind of throws away the whole entirety of the video of beginner budget decks. So again, if you're looking for very competitive top tier decks, please refer to our deck testing videos, our deck guides, or ask me in the comments, and I will give you, you know, the resources needed to see what you need. As for this, for new intermediate players, budget decks, please keep that in mind. I do not want to, you know, I know there's going to be a comment with this deck is blah 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 will never get me to legend. Probably not, you know. I mean, it's a budget deck. So without any further ado, or without any more ranting, standard Cthulhu Druid. So basically, if you're not familiar with Hearthstone, Druid is a very, it has cards like Innervate, and Innervate says gain 2 mana crystals this turn, and Wild Growth, which is gain an empty mana crystal. And they also introduced Mire Keeper in this most recent expansion. It says summon a 2/2 slime or gain a mana crystal. So Druid is known for accelerating your mana, which allows you to play really strong creatures early on in the game, but you do sacrifice card advantage at that. So like, let's say you use 2 Innervates and you're able to summon out a Druid of the Claw on turn 1. You've sacrificed 2 cards to summon 1 card early. But in response to that, you play a huge card early, so you're able to deal a lot of damage to them. You can also kill some of their weaker creatures, at least 2 or 3 of them. And on top of that, your opponent may end up using more than 2 spells to get rid of the card that you use 2 spells on. So there's a lot of pros and cons to being able to pump out a big creature early. Most of the time, though, it works out well for you, or the Druid class wouldn't be very good. Being able to, Wild Growth, Innervate, and Mire Keeper out some, acceleration of your mana, very key. Along with that, the deck has a pretty solid curve, so you're mostly playing a card basically every turn, whether it's a creature or a spell. And in my opinion, this deck would work very against Warrior and any sort of aggro deck. The Acidic Swamp Oozes are always nice. This was one of my favorite vanilla cards coming into this, because let's say your opponent plays, let's say, a Gore Howl, which is an epic warrior weapon, and this card has the potential to really screw you over in the long run of the game because it's just so powerful. And Acidic Swamp Ooze, you know, it doesn't really cost, it's a 2-mana 3/2, so the stats are good, and it says destroy your opponent's weapon. So it doesn't really matter what that weapon is, you're just getting rid of it. So it's automatically going 1 for 1. And then on top of that, they're going to essentially have to use a card or a creature to get rid of it. So it's going to go for 2 for 1, giving you that value there. So overall, very solid deck in my opinion. Cthulhu Druid is very popular now in the new meta. So I think you'll have some pretty good success with this deck. Again, how much success you have with these decks depends on, you know, kind of how you play them. And then if you know, would read the bottom half of, you know, all he wrote here, it'll definitely help you out if you're not familiar with how to play a Druid deck. So if you're like, oh, I've lost 5 in a row, this deck sucks, it's probably not the deck, it's probably you're just not playing it correctly. So please, you know, do your research if you're new to Hearthstone, if you're new to anything basically, you do your research, figure out, you know, what you want, how to do particular things so you can do it to the best of your ability. You can't jump into any game and just instantly be an expert or a pro and just perform really well. That's not how the world works. I mean, to some people it does, but to most of us, including me, it does not work that way. You have to work at it, do research, and if you want to perform well, you have to put in the time and effort. All right. So the next deck is going to be the Budget Mid-Range Hunter. Keep in mind that all these decks are standard. These are not wild decks. So as we know, the Hunter class, it's very fast-paced, does a lot of damage very quickly, and is basically known for, and when everybody thinks of Hunter, they think of just going face, which is attacking the opponent's hero directly. They ignore all creatures on the field. They just keep hitting the opponent's face, and hopefully they kill them eventually. Mid-range Hunter kind of has that same mindset, but at the same time, it does have creatures that allow you to make value trades, such as the Houndmaster, Unleash the Hounds, Eaglehorn Bow. The Karen Grub is actually really good in my opinion. A lot of people looked over it when the set first released. I looked over it myself. I was like, you know what? A 3-mana 2/5 doesn't really do anything when it comes out. It is a beast, but you know, at the same time, you think of Hunter, and it's just like, that doesn't do face damage. I don't want that. But in the long run, if you think about it, you can play Karen Grub on turn 3 and then follow up with a Houndmaster on turn 4. And Houndmaster says, Battlecry, give a friendly beast 2/2. So all of a sudden, your 3-drop 2/5 that essentially did nothing is now a 4-drop, or now has 4 attack, 7 defense, or 7 HP, and it has taunt. So at that point, it's a huge wall. And on turn 4, you know, you and your opponent aren't going to be playing the biggest of creatures. Like essentially this, when it comes out, is not that threatening. But you turn this into a 4/7 that has taunt, you know what? You're going to turn some heads with that. So there's a lot of good synergies within Beast, along with the Cult Master and Unleash the Hounds. Infested Wolf and Savannah Highmane, in my opinion, are some of the strongest Hunter cards right now, especially the Savannah Highmane. Like, in my opinion, this is one of the best 6-drop cards out there right now. It's very powerful. When Savannah Highmane comes out and your opponent doesn't deal with it, and you can attack them, their face, their life total, at least one time, there's a saying that you win at that point. If this Savannah Highmane, this giant tiger, can reach your opponent's life total, like they can make contact, you will win that game. It's just a saying though. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but 90% of the time, it works 100% of the time. And again, this has the introduction to the deck, the requirements, the play style, and all that good stuff. So Hunter, good way to go. Mid-range Hunter, actually, it wasn't that popular when the old gods got released, as Hunter was kind of like, I don't want to play Hunter, I want to chest out these N'Zoth decks, these Cthulhu decks, and all that good stuff. But actually, it's been coming in the light. If you haven't heard of the card or haven't seen it yet, it's called what is it called, Tony? Like Unleash the Wild, I believe it's called. Call of the Wild. It's an 8-drop card, and it says basically summon all of the animal companions. Of course, this is a budget deck, and it's not going to have that epic in here, but if you're really interested in Hunter, and especially mid-range Hunter, Call of the Wild, look into that card, because that card's absolutely insane. Like, that card is beyond crazy good. So, all right, so looking at a deck that you will be oh so familiar with after you play Hearthstone for even a day or two, and that's going to be the Zoo Warlock. So again, budget standard Zoo Warlock. This whole deck revolves around playing very, how do I say this? Very efficient, low-cost creatures that are very hard to remove off the board and then that can stay there long enough to deal large quantities of damage to your opponent or make value trades, which is killing off your opponent's creatures with using little to no resources. So let's say they spend 6 mana to summon this big creature. You can essentially play your 1 mana Possessed Villager, put a Power Overwhelming on them, so you've spent 2 mana to make a 5/5 card that can kill their 6-drop or 5-drop, and then on top of that, your Possessed Villager, normally after you Power Overwhelming a creature, it would die due to the Power Overwhelming's effect. When Possessed Villager dies, it actually brings out another 1/1 called Shadow Beast. So not only did you kill his 6 or 7 drop, or 5 or 6 drop with your 2 mana, your 1/1 is still there. So they're just very resilient, low-cost creatures that have a high impact on the board because they're just very hard to get rid of. And then over time, you basically just make a lot of value trades and you whittle your opponent down with such a large field you have, because every card in the deck, the highest drop in it's 4 mana. So essentially your curve is very low. You're going to be playing creatures every turn. And the reason you can do this is because of the Warlock passive. And that says sacrifice 2 health, draw 1 card. This deck would not perform otherwise. There's a very similar deck. And that's kind of like aggro Paladin, which I didn't include in this list because I found Zoo to be a little bit more consistent. But it also has a card in there that allows you to draw as many cards as in your opponent's hand, which allows that deck to work as well. Because normally, if you have a deck filled with low-cost creatures, you play them all, they die, and then you have nothing, you run out of steam. But the Warlock passive, which is, again, sacrifice 2 health, draw 1 cards, allow you to keep maintaining that constant kind of coal in the fire aspect. You keep that train going. Going into the budget standard mid-range Shaman. Shaman has used to be not so good, and it was kind of laughed at by the Hearthstone community for the longest time because it was a deck that, had potential, but it didn't really, it was missing 1 to maybe 2 to 3 cards actually that really made the deck worth playing. And now that the Whispers of the Old Gods was released, mid-range Shaman has shot its way, or I should say Totem Shaman, maybe not so much mid-range, but both of them are very similar in the way they're played. Has shot to a tier 1 deck, being very competitive, very consistent on ladder, and will perform very well for you. So basically the way this deck will run, it's very, I wouldn't say very similar to the way mid-range Hunter and the Druid deck are played, but basically you're playing very good early game cards, such as the Unbound Elemental. I keep hovering over the cards hoping they'll pop up, but it's like sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So the Unbound Elemental, along with the Totem Golem, Thing from Below, Fire Elemental, all of these cards have high impact on the board because Fire Elemental, when he comes out, does 3 damage. Thing from Below, you can essentially play him for free after you've played 6 totems, and there's, your passive is summoning a totem, your Mana Tide counts as a totem, Totem Golem counts as a totem, but I think what makes this deck really strong and what set it over the edge was this card right here, the Faceless, the 4-drop 7/7. This is huge. If your opponent cannot deal with this, you will win the game. 7 damage on turn 4 is absolutely crazy. On top of that, you have cards like Feral Spirit that allows you to summon 2/2/3s with Taunt, which kind of protect you because then you can hide behind or have the Flame Tongue totem or your Mana Tide totem hide behind those taunt creatures, which decks normally don't have the ability to, just summon 2 taunt creatures for 3 mana. I mean, besides maybe a Mage and their 0/2s, they don't have 2/3, and a 2/3 allows them to trade into your opponent's creatures. So not only are your opponents killing off their own creatures to get past your taunt, you're summoning these huge minions, like the Faceless. And then also the Bloodlust is huge, because give your minions +3 attack this turn. This can be used on your totems. So essentially your 0/2 totems that may not be able to attack, all of a sudden have 3 attack. So if you have 2 to 4 totems down, you can actually kill a creature with 6 health, or you could go face for 6. So it all depends on the situation. Again, this deck revolves around playing creatures very early on in the game, gaining that board control, and then maintaining it through playing very powerful creatures, and then finishing off with maybe a Bloodlust, or just having a really solid board. So really good deck at the moment, and I would assume that mid-range Shaman would take you far. Keep in mind though, with these sort of decks that revolve around playing things really early, like the Zoo and this mid-range Shaman deck, you only have Hex in the deck to kind of take care of those really high impact creatures your opponents may be playing. So because you only have 2 Hexes in the deck, you kind of have to be careful with using them. So let's say you use a Hex on maybe a 3 or 4 drop they've played, and then later in the game they play maybe a Ragnaros or a really huge taunt card, and you can't get past it. Just be careful when using your Hex, because you only have 2 of those in the deck. Same thing with if you're playing the Warrior, Tempo Warrior, you only have 2 executes. So you just have to be careful on your resources, make sure you're not using some of your really nice cards to get rid of some of your opponent's cards on some of the lesser cards they may play, just to get rid of it at the time. But in the long run, it may not be the best play. Also, heading into our last budget deck, we've got the standard Cthulhu Mage. I tried to pick the classes that most beginner players would kind of shy towards, Mage being Mage, Hunter, and Warlock being kind of those classes. I know some of you may be wondering, where's Rogue, and where is where's another class that I can't think of? Anyway, Rogue and Warrior, those classes take a little bit more time to develop a decent understanding of the game, because you have to play those decks in a particular way for them to perform really, really well. And as a beginner player, you may not have those understandings of like deck archetypes and how they match up versus particular, other decks, and how those classes perform and how they synergize or how they don't synergize. So I kind of tried to pick the easiest classes for the top 5 beginner decks. One of which, of course, the Mage. All right, so the Cthulhu Mage, again, this deck, just like the Druid, kind of revolves around this Cthulhu card, which I probably should have talked about when I was talking about the Druid deck, but I kind of, again, it's now 7:54 in the morning, so I'm doing my best to kind of go over as much as I can. But just like the Druid deck, this deck is going to revolve around Cthulhu, and there's cards in the deck that kind of buff your Cthulhu, whether it be the Beckoner of Evil that says Battlecry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2, wherever it is, the Disciple of Cthulhu, deal 2 damage, give your Cthulhu +2/+2, or the Twilight Elder, at the end of your turn, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. Same thing with the Cthulhu's Chosen. So the deck revolves around, kind of buffing up this huge 10-drop Cthulhu card. And he says, Battlecry, deal damage equal to this minion's attack, randomly split among all enemies. So he just shoots little 1-damage things, depending on how much his attack is at the end of the game. It'll probably be somewhere around maybe the 14 to 20 range, depending on how many Cthulhu cards you've used to buff him. So he'll definitely do, he's a nice finisher, especially for the Mage, as you have cards like Fireball and Frostbolt in the deck, that also deal direct damage if you choose to do so. So you've definitely got a lot of burst in this deck, no doubt. This basically looks like Tempo Mage in a sense, but instead of having Flame Wakers in it, which you guys, if you're beginners, you don't know what that is, you have Cthulhu buffs, which is, again, the Beckoner of Evil, Disciple of Cthulhu, the Twilight Elder. So this deck is basically pretty straightforward for the most part. You're going to be playing, you're trying to search for your Mana Worm, your Sorcerer's Apprentice early on in the game. If you run out of cards, you Arcane Intellect, draw 2 more. Use your Polymorphs and Fireballs to maybe remove some of your opponent's creatures that are annoying. You follow up with a Faceless Summoner, which is really, really strong in my opinion. It's a 6-drop 5/5 Battlecry summon a random 3-cost minion, which can actually summon you a Flame Waker, by the way, which has happened for me. So hopefully that'll happen to you guys as well. But this is a very strong common card that came with the Whispers of the Old Gods set, and I think will really help, kind of those budget players be able to pump out a very competitive Mage deck with cards like this that were released. On top of that, Disciple of Cthulhu is also very good. Unfortunately, I think this guy is a rare, so he's a little bit more expensive. But again, this entire deck, I'm pretty sure all of these decks cost less than 2k dust to build from scratch. Okay, dust cost 2480. I was completely wrong about that, but I think every other deck is cheaper than 2,000. So we have 1,500 here, 1,520 there, 1,080 there, yeah, and then dust cost is 3k there. So I say Druid is definitely the most expensive, and you kind of, I kind of knew that because Druid has some pretty expensive cards in it. But for the most part, if you're, looking for the cheap of the cheap, 1,080 right here, 1,520 right here, and then followed by, of course, the Shaman, the Mage, and then Druid being most expensive. So I probably should have started with maybe the cheapest deck first, but again, I really didn't even, for some reason, I didn't realize the dust cost of this deck was 3,000. Even though in comparison to some other decks that cost like 12,000, this is nothing. Trust me, guys, there are decks out there that have, 5 legendaries plus in them, and that's just a huge amount of dust for a new player to acquire. So these dusts, in comparison to some of the decks that you will be seeing on ladder, are very cheap and will, you can pull a win. off with these decks versus some of the more powerful decks that you may come across on ladder. As long as you have a good understanding of your deck, you know how the matchup works, you mulligan correctly, and you play accordingly. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Again, I did not make these particular decks. I went over them, and if I found I should change something, I would have. But these decks overall, like, they make sense to me. Like, if I was building a budget mage deck, this is exactly what I would do. It was written by a guy who knows Hearthstone just as well as me, or maybe even better. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up everything we need to cover. If I missed anything, or you guys can point out something that maybe the newer players would find helpful that maybe I didn't cover, you can go ahead and leave that in the comment section below for them to definitely help them out, because this video is all about helping out the newer to intermediate players looking to get, you know, some good decks in there that are pretty consistent, and who may be a little bit confused with the new standard format and how to actually go about building an effective deck. So, as always, guys, I'm Warshack, and happy whatever the hell day it is.